Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Gilles Gosselin. Welcome, Gilles.
Good morning, Pearlie.
During the past year, we have featured a number of guests on our podcast. Some represented health and safety organizations, and some were health and safety professionals who work for a variety of NB organizations. We also talked to individuals who were injured on the job and family members who've lost loved ones on the job. Some stories that we've told are easy to listen to, some are not, but they all need to be told. Today we want to talk to an individual who was injured on the job about his health and safety concerns in NB workplaces, his journey, and the challenges he's faced in recovery, and what changes he would like to see, especially in his trade, to make his trade safer. Let's start with, tell us about Gilles Gosselin before your injury. Your background, what led you into your trade?
Well, thank you, Pearlie. Thank you for having me on board to share my story. A bit about myself. I started working in the fire protection industry around 2004, so nearly 2 decades now, if not for my injury that I was exposed to a couple of years. I had a very fortunate career of working in the field of fire protection, sprinkler systems. It's been a very rewarding career for me. I've had plenty of good experiences and challenges that I welcomed working in and out of the field. I've taken on many administrative duties over the years, management roles, back out into the field. So like I said, much of my experience has been very rewarding and has taught me not only a lot about my trade, but other trades in construction in general, over those nearly 20 years. And unfortunately, nearly 3 years ago, I was exposed to an electrical injury on the job.
So tell us a little bit about that day. What happened that day exactly?
Well, on that evening, unfortunately, as I mentioned, I was exposed to an electrical injury. I was performing my duties as I would typically be doing, on a daily basis. I was doing a task that I had done hundreds or thousands of times, which was just installing fasteners to support our piping system for the sprinkler system. Unfortunately, I was also working alone that evening. There were other individuals in the building, such as a security guard and the general contractor, but I was alone at the time of the accident. So essentially, I was working on top of a step ladder to install some fasteners for the piping support when I extended my left hand over to what was the remainders of a steel stud that had been demolished throughout this renovation project. And the reason I extended my arm over there was for a third point of contact as I ascended my ladder. And unfortunately, as I reached out for this steel stud to support my body, it was energized with electricity. So at that point, my body was held on by the electrical source, and it was as if time kind of stood still for me at that point in time. Knowing that if I didn't let go, there's a chance that it could potentially be fatal, and then of course it's difficult to process what's going through a person's mind at the time, but you also know if you let go too fast, you might fall to the ground as well, right? So a lot of things happening at once. And where I was very fortunate is that I was able to let go and not fall down my ladder. Not quite knowing what had happened at the time, although I did feel like I was undertaking electrical current. It's only when I set my 2 feet on the ground and looked above into the ceiling space that I noticed that there were exposed electrical wires coming out of an electrical box, which would have led to the cause of the electrical current.
So how seriously, or what happened next, I should say?
Well, in a state of shock, of course, confusion, pain started to settle in, confusion. I immediately seek first aid. I knew that the security guard was just outside the room, and I went to see him immediately. I said, this is what just happened. Being kind of naive a bit to the hazards of electricity, I think like a lot of people, I didn't know what to expect. At that point in time, I knew I was still alive, so that was a good sign. But what was to come, I had no idea. So we then proceeded to advise the general contractor of what had happened, and continued to apply first aid and to kind of assess, should I be taken to the hospital or not, or call 911 or what have you. I was being asked some questions. I was kind of in no state of mind to really understand, what my needs were, what should be done next. I really had wished that I would have been taken to the hospital immediately via ambulance, to be forward with you. But there was hesitation there between the contractor and the first attendee of first aid, where I remained on site for approximately an hour before I was driven to the hospital.
The first aider, who was the first aider?
Well, the general contractor did assist me with first aid, and I guess there were two people on the premises, as I described. The security guard was there to kind of assist me to the general contractor. I guess that would have created a little bit of chaos for everyone involved. No one expects an injury, and then when an injury occurs, how do you deal with it? Based on what I described about being naive to electricity, I think that even as a first aider, that would probably be a difficult task to deal with, because the immediate consequences of the shock are not visible. It's an invisible injury, and many of the main concerns with electricity could be like heart failure, for example, or difficulty breathing and things like that, which could be fatal. So as I described, I was asked, if I do recall, whether or not I wanted them to call an ambulance. My first instinct at the time was uncertainty. And I think with that said, often we, especially in the construction industry, we all get bumps and bruises and scrapes and things like that. And, there's a bit of pride sometimes involved, and with the tough guy mentality, unfortunately. And, I think from that perspective, I didn't know. I mean, my situation was kind of left in the hands of others, and I can say I think that I felt that they were underprepared to deal with that.
At this stage, I just want to interrupt you for a second. At this stage, your employer, what kind of training had they given you relative to, this kind of situation? Had they given you any?
Well, truthfully, Pearlie, I mean, having been in the industry for nearly 2 decades, I mean, I've partaken in every safety course that is mandatory, first aid myself, things like that. But it made me realize how we have little to no knowledge on electrical safety. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm not an expert in electrical safety by any means, but some figures that I have found that oftentimes is that I think, and this is based on OSHA numbers in the United States, is about 70% of the time electrical injuries happen to non-electrical workers. So we're not prepared for that. We're not wearing proper PPE to deal with electrical injuries. An electrician that might be exposed to electricity usually has the knowledge beforehand that it may or may not occur. But when you're surprised by, doing something you've done thousands of times, and all of a sudden, like I said, you're held on and you cannot let go, there's really nothing you can do. And then for a first aider, well, what are the symptoms? What is this person dealing with? Should I take them to the hospital right away? Should I not? I can't speak on behalf of the first aider, but I do believe that when something like that happens, I would stress that if someone was to relive what I did that day, they should seek medical attention immediately.
Now, did you ever get to understand why there was power going through that piece of metal when there shouldn't have been, obviously?
Well, no, and I appreciate that question very much, Pearlie. My injury almost happened. It'll be 3 years in May. And I've been asking many questions since the very beginning. An internal investigation was conducted by the contractor on site following the injury to kind of see what happened. And, following my injury, my priority was my health, my condition, my family, having to deal with, I have 2 young daughters. Their father is now injured, sick at home. My priorities were not the investigation. I kind of let that to the experts to deal with in the back. Of course, I had many questions, and I was hoping that perhaps I would also be questioned about what happened that day, from my point of view. So what I don't know today is really what did happen, because there was really failure to have a thorough investigation done on my injury. And from what I do know, based on my experience and my observations, is that what was reported as far as what happened that day was incorrect. Therefore, the reasons for my injury, I believe were downplayed, and perhaps, I don't know if it was due to fear of accountability or things like that, because there are, supervisors, employers, owners, everyone under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, of course, is responsible for the employees, for the safety of the workplace, the rights to know and all this stuff. So were there failures? Certainly. I think most accidents in general is due to a lack of failure somewhere. It's, we're all human, but I think if we don't dig enough deep into the root cause of what an accident is, it's rather difficult to prevent it from happening in the future.
So a couple of questions that come out of this. One, were you ever interviewed about that as part of the investigation?
Unfortunately not, Pearlie. As described, initially my main concern was my health and well-being. And through the workers' compensation system, I did fill out a form to advise them I had been injured, as all workers are required to do. And at the time, for me, it was more of a formality, to be truthful with you. The attending physician at the hospital essentially put me off for a few days, did not find any internal entry or exit wounds for the electrical contact, and the initial tests that were conducted were negative, and essentially, I was to take the weekend off and go back to work the next week. That's what I went home thinking. I thought, this is, it is what it is. I'm going to follow their lead and whatnot. But then a few days went by, and come the next Monday morning when it was time to return to work, that's when I realized I still had problems, and returned to the hospital for more medical assistance, which then prompted me to contact WorkSafe and start asking questions. Has an investigation been done? When will someone contact me to discuss what happened? And days and weeks were going by, and I was not hearing back from anybody. So I continued that pursuit slowly because at that time I started requiring physiotherapy, rehabilitation, etc. Fast forwarding some time, my injury did become long term, at least for the time being, that I would require this type of assistance.
What kind of symptoms did you have?
Oh, Pearly, the symptoms from these electrical injuries are quite vast. I deal with severe chronic pain, extreme fatigue, muscle contractions, nerve pain, joint pain. I get sensations in my body almost as though I feel the electric shock sensations repeating themselves. That has led to mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, trauma. The list goes on. And that said, my priorities, again, once more, were no longer about the investigation. I was going to let these things unfold, and in due time, hoping that someone would reach out to me. And after many months, I was finally approached by a health and safety officer from WorkSafe New Brunswick that had been assigned to look into the incident. And a conclusion had already been drawn before I could even speak on behalf of what had happened. And essentially what occurred is that a phone call and some emails had been exchanged between the general contractor, building owner, and WorkSafe New Brunswick about what had happened that day. But with the days and weeks and months that had passed, with no real investigation, unfortunately, there was really no way to go back and have a look from an honest perspective, from an outside, non-biased approach, what happened that day and why. And I still have questions today on why that did not happen. And not only why did that not happen, what are the consequences for or accountability for hiding some of the truths about what happened that day. Because according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there are provisions to follow to reporting accidents. Mm-hmm. Electrical injuries being one of them. So as time went on, again, I kept getting more and more questions. I've been asking more and more questions. The more I looked into it, the more knowledgeable I became about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Electrical Installations and Inspections Act of New Brunswick as well, which clearly states that any exposure to electricity shall be reported to the Chief Electrical Inspector of the Province of New Brunswick with the Department of Justice and Public Safety. So there's two entities here that should have been advised of my electrical injury. Now, if you'll allow me to kind of go back to the beginning, one thing that I should point out that is very important is that following my injury, I did spend some time at the hospital that evening, but was then further released. I was left on my own. I was working out of town. I had been traveling. So, I was alone and scared. I had to take a hotel room. I really felt abandoned, to be honest with you.
Pardon me for interrupting here. Where was your own organization as well on this?
Well, my organization is based out of Moncton, New Brunswick, and I had been working in St. John, New Brunswick. Okay. So I had been traveling daily, to and from the job, because some parts were done during the day and some work had to be done during the evening, for logistical reasons, interrupting services and employees, etc. And again, I was working alone, and with working alone, there are other challenges as well. Had I been working with someone else, would that accident have been avoided? We don't know. There's many factors. There's always many factors that can be considered. The area in which I did get injured, it was somewhat of a tight area. It was a small working area with a lot of materials and tools. So housekeeping was a challenge, having to move your ladder here or there. I believe that the way I intended to do my work was the right way. There was no other alternative for me to maintain my 3-point contact as I suggested that I was intending on doing. You know, my intentions were to work safe, and I still got hurt. But yeah, so following my injury, I did have a coworker arrive on site about 30 minutes after, and he's the one who then eventually drove me to the hospital.
Okay.
But then upon the release of the hospital, as mentioned, you know, I was left alone. And the following day, I needed to drive myself back to Moncton. You know, I didn't really have any other alternative. But before doing so, you know, one thing that came to mind was, well, I kind of want to touch base with the job site to see if there's any further development on what happened the night before. You know, so I did slowly make my way back to the job site to ask these questions. And that's when I was kind of a bit surprised because I did overhear a conversation while I was there that perhaps no one knew that I would hear. And that was that within that morning alone, they had found other electrical hazards on site. So that was very concerning because, you know, fortunately, I guess I was the only one who was exposed to electricity. And, you know, it seemed as though it would have been a potential hazard for many workers there all along. And I did advise WorkSafe New Brunswick of those concerns. I said that, you know, there were many other hazards and all this information, which I thought definitely warranted a thorough investigation. So to lead back to that question, is that I still have more questions than answers today about what took place there that unfortunate evening, Pearlie. And I don't believe that if there's any way to prevent any further injuries, such as electrical injuries or any other for that matter, if we don't look into them, how are we going to prevent them from happening in the future? You know, and that's a grave concern, and that not only I have, but I think that a lot of people should have in general, is that if we have rules and regulations in place and they're not being followed, you know, what's going to be done about it?
So was this a new or old construction?
No, this was an existing building, a fairly old building to my knowledge. And it was a renovation. So with the renovation, I mean, certainly there are different hazards than there would be, say, new construction. You know, every construction project has its own types of hazards. Every situation is different. You know, there's so many variables, certainly in construction, that there are always hazards, but they change. They change minute by minute, day by day. But certainly, I believe that working on an existing building you would definitely be more susceptible to electrical hazards, for instance, because you're dealing with environments that are, you know, live and active. And unlike new construction, those hazards are often eliminated from the get.
So I'm trying to think of questions that my folks listening to our podcast might ask, and I guess, you know, they'd go back and ask questions. For example, okay, your employer out of Moncton, you were working alone. Do you know if you had your organization had a working alone procedure or policy?
Well,
had you been sort of taught about that?
Well, one thing I can say for certain is that every evening that I had been working there alone, I was filling out forms with the general contractor. You know, basically, I would kind of do a daily hazard assessment, right? But you know, my hazard assessment would be, you know, focused on the task that I would be doing. You know, what hazards would I identify? And, you know, I'm not an electrician. I'm not a building inspector. You know, so I believe I carried out my due diligence. I worked, utilizing my own PPE, things like that, which, I'm not saying that those procedures had not been followed, but I guess perhaps procedures of allowing individuals to walk into an environment that's hazardous.
Did the contractor ever give you or provide any sort of orientation to you, or ever go around with you and point out areas of concern?
Orientations, most certainly. I believe that in most construction sites, that's pretty customary. But again, going back to the electrical injury, I think that that's just something that is highly overlooked, especially for individuals that are, that don't work with electricity, and I shared a number with you earlier, about 70%, I believe, of electrical injuries occur to people that don't work in electrical occupation.
Yep.
So, that can be construction, labor, maintenance, it can be anyone really. And the only way to really avoid these types of injuries really are to have qualified individuals do inspections. I don't believe that should be left up to the employee. We have a right to know, we have a right to participate and refuse and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're all experts in our own field. And whether I was working alone or not, I think that accident was bound to happen. And unfortunately, it happened to me.
So did you ever find out why there was still power going through these pieces of metal that there shouldn't be? Did anybody ever sort of, even to today, do you have any sense as to why? Was it a case an electrician at some point didn't properly disconnect?
That's a very fantastic question, Pearlie. I do have some good theories on that. Unfortunately, because a thorough investigation wasn't conducted, I can't tell you with certainty. But what I do know is that, again, the point of contact that I had with the steel stud that was energized with electricity was part of a wall that had been torn down a few days before. So, that said, in all likelihood, the electrical source that I was exposed to likely fed a receptacle plug or a light switch or something in one of the few walls that had been torn down. So was there perhaps a shortcut that happened at some point where, it all comes down to pressure sometimes, and often in the construction industry, everyone's under pressure. Companies get projects because they're the lowest bidder. When you're the lowest, you're under the gun. It's about time and performance. I think that everyone has safety in mind, but often it gets overlooked because of the time factor and pressure. And I do know that project, there was definitely a lot of pressure. I felt the pressure. I could tell the general contractor felt the pressure. So what my theory is that electrical source had been removed. It had been tampered with at one point or another. And, unfortunately, that shortcut, led to a workplace injury. Now, being unsatisfied with the inspections that did take place or lack thereof, I did reach out to the chief electrical inspector of New Brunswick almost a year after the fact, when I wasn't getting any satisfaction or answers to my questions. And sure enough, they decided to conduct an investigation on their own. Now, being an independent body from WorkSafe New Brunswick, they do things their own way, and they did complete a report, and that report did have some findings, which did identify some concerns. Originally they had identified that electrical source was existing, and I do have no doubts that it was existing. This was, again, an existing building under renovation. But the notion today is that electrical source was existing, therefore it's it's nobody's problem, for lack of better wording, But if we're just to sit here and say that an abandoned electrical source in any type of working environment is nobody's problem, what did we learn from that?
Mm-hmm. Now, as you went through the workers' compensation system, what were some of the challenges you faced there?
Oof. How much time do we got, Pearlie?
Just to quickly summarize, what were some of the main ones that?
Well, one of the main things that I can tell you about electrical injuries that are different from a lot of other common injuries is that it's an invisible injury. Okay. And that presents a great challenge for healthcare professionals as a whole, which translates to insurance companies, the workers' compensation. This is a known fact that electrical injuries are an invisible injury, and that has created a lot of problems for me through my recovery process. Feeling misunderstood. Tests that are negative, that don't show anything objective. Mm-hmm. But that's what we know about electrical injuries today. I'm still faced with challenges today on speaking with doctors that have experience with electrical injuries.
Have you been able to find one?
Well, in fact, I have, Pearlie, and unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to see him in person. For your listeners, so that they know, electrical injuries is not something that doctors specialize in. Mm-hmm. But there is one center in Canada located in Ontario that does focus on rehabilitation of electrical injuries. And they've been doing this for years. And I have reached out to them to explain my story, and they know we're misunderstood. They see this. In fact, WSIB in Ontario, which is our equivalent to WorkSafe New Brunswick here, they're well aware of this program, and they do send injured workers there upon merit. Of course, every case is different. And I've come to find out that even here in New Brunswick, WorkSafe New Brunswick has been aware of this program for at least 10 years or more. But I just haven't had the luck. I haven't had the luck to receive this adequate medical aid. I've been really left feeling abandoned by the system, to be honest with you. My participation has been there. My participation has been noted. My willingness to get better, to regain my quality of life back, to be able to go back to work one day. These are all my goals. But I feel until I receive the adequate medical attention that I need, not only will I ever receive closure or any success at a better quality of life, I feel that this will translate into problems for other workers down the road that may be affected by electrical injuries. So it's important to note that early intervention on electrical injuries is extremely important, because there's a vast amount of symptoms that often can take 1 to 5 years to even come to light.
Have you mentioned earlier, prior to our podcast when we were talking, appeals? You've gone through an appeal process as well?
Unfortunately not, Pearlie. I'm currently waiting to do so. So I am still, I'm still part of the workers' compensation system today. But nothing's going on. I've been, I've been removed from any, physical type of rehabilitation and or help, mental health. I found that interesting today as we're recording this. I think that today is Bell Let's Talk Day, I guess. And the reason I bring this up too, which ties into one of the good podcasts I listened to last week, with Roy Siliker about the mental health and suicide awareness and stuff. That podcast really hit close to home for me, because not only do I work in the construction industry and could see how that correlates, but one thing that, if I could mention that, wasn't discussed in that podcast is how, injured workers, dealing with the workers' compensation system has, significant mental health tolls.
Yep, sure does.
It's a difficult challenge to navigate through. You're alone. And, you're very vulnerable. You need support, more than anything. And oftentimes you feel like, it's lacking. And yeah, I think that, we really need to, start focusing more on mental health as a whole, whether it's, due to workplace injuries or, just in general. I'm not scared to talk about it, because I'm a victim of it. And I know I'm not alone, and I'd like to see, workers get more support.
Yeah, one of the things that I think has been well noted over the years is that, when people experience an accident, an injury of any type, a lot of times people talk about, well, the physical sort of consequences, we have to deal with those and get the worker back to work. But as you say, it's a big challenge. It's not talked about very much, unfortunately, is the mental aspect. Accidents, injuries have a tremendous effect on a person's mental wellness, so to speak, from a point of view of it affects you, it affects your family. It's needs to be talked about more, needs to be given more consideration. What's a message you'd like to share going forward? Obviously, you've covered a number of messages there that, we need to do better incident accident investigations and so on and so on. If you were to give sort of one final recommendation, something you'd like to see it put in place or happen to prevent someone else going through what you had to, what would it be?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that's always the question, right? It's a great question, but I think it's a question we ask all too often. Safety, and yet people are still getting injured every day, right, Pearlie?
Yes, that's right.
And if
how do we change it?
How would I change it? Well, I've had a lot of time to think about that, really, and I don't have one good answer, but one thing that I think that we really need to start considering, is enforcement. We need more enforcement, I think, so that people realize that shortcuts are unacceptable. We need to investigate more what happens. I'm a perfect example of that. I still have many questions today about what happened to me that day. Regulations change. Regulations are continuously adapting to, things we learn or technology and things like that. But so long as we don't enforce them, again, accidents will continue to happen. And I'm speaking, on behalf of construction workers. There's many other industries affected, whether it be healthcare or anything like that. I can't speak to those specifics, but in construction, I feel that, although we have a safety mindset, oftentimes, time and pressure play a factor. And, I think, as much as we don't like to think so, I think things sometimes need to slow down. I think we really need to take time to look at what the hazards are. And I'm speaking from experience. We get up in the morning, we go to work, we become complacent oftentimes because we know what we're doing. There's a lot of generational gaps, there's the young ones that have less experience, but then there's also the older generations that have done it the same way for hundreds of years and they don't want to change. So it's about culture too. So, what the answer is, I don't know the exact answer, Pearlie, but I do think that we really need to start holding people accountable, because otherwise, we're sending the wrong message through. We can educate, we can send people for training, we can wear PPE, all those things are very important. But at the end of the day, when you work in an environment with other people involved, you can be as safe as you want to be, but you may be the victim of an injury, for someone else's lack of preparedness or what have you, right? So, I don't wish what I'm going through upon anybody else. I really don't, whether it be with my electrical injury, or dealing with the rehabilitation process and the Workers' Compensation Commission. It's a very challenging time for me and my family.
Look, Gilles, would like to thank you very much for joining us today on our podcast and sharing your story with us. We know it's never easy. You bring out a lot of great points, and we would like to hear from all our listeners, actually, that, if you have a story you'd like to share with us of any type, whether it's something good that happened relative to preventing an incident, accident, or injury, or whether it's your experience afterwards, we'd like to hear from you. These stories are important, and we very much want to be part of telling them. Thank you very much, Gilles. Thank you very much to our listeners. And if you would like to reach out to us, you can always reach us at podcast@ssnb.ca. Stay safe. See you next week.